Lots of times in the sport of bass fishing, one of the most difficult things is finding and catching fish. A lot of people get locked into one style or technique. The key to catching fish, a high majority of the time, is versatility. That's what we're going to try to stress in this here program. How to find fish, how to dissect the cover, when to fish it, the different seasons, the type of baits you throw in the spring, summer, fall, and even a little bit on winter fishing. A lot of these types of cover we're going to show you today. We won't be able to catch fish on some of the techniques we're going to do, but it'll give you an idea of what to do in these different seasons, some of these different types of cover, how to fish it, the different things we do to catch fish. The real key, like I said earlier, is versatility, and that's what you have to stress on these different types of cover. One of the biggest keys in fishing visible cover and being versatile is having the right equipment. It's very, very important. It's just like a carpenter. He can't go out there and do everything with one hammer or one saw. These are actually tools of the trade. This here heavy piece of timber up ahead is a perfect example of visible structure. It's the type of stuff people enjoy fishing. They can see it, they can run a bait by it. You can do a lot of different things to catch fish out from underneath a tree or a group of trees like that. I'm going to start out with a spinnerbait. This is the spring of the year, the water's still fairly cold. A spinnerbait works real good. A single spin that you can pull up next to that stuff, let it flutter down beside it. But I've got a special rod that I can throw it with. In this here heavy cover, I want a rod where I can maneuver the bait, work it around the trees, shoot it underhand in between that stuff. This here particular rod is a 5.5 footer. It lets me shoot it out there and kind of maneuver the bait around. When I get next to that cover, I just kind of bring it up there and let it flutter down beside it. I let it almost go to the bottom, start it in again, bring it out. Okay, now that heavy piece up there, when you're going down a bank like this, all this timber may be scattered, and all of a sudden you're going to have one little group where there'll be 4 or 5 trees, or maybe a broken down treetop laying right in the midst of it. That is more than likely where your biggest fish are going to be laying, is in your heavier cover. Try to stay back off that cover a little bit and start out with a spinnerbait. And make yourself a cast past your cover. Always throw way past it, bring it up to it, let it flutter down, kind of lean into it and yo-yo it by. A lot of times just the change in that bait coming by the cover will trigger a strike. If you'd reel it by there real fast in this cold water, a fish more than likely wouldn't come up and grab it. But just the fact that it changes speed and starts dropping down on top of him, it kind of forces him to bite. Always throw by it, work up to it, and we kind of got caught on a branch right there, and then let it yo-yo down. A lot of times you can't do it in one cast. Fish get a little laid back because of weather. There's a lot of different moods they get in, and weather is usually the factor. A cold front will slow them down, and you may need to make a repeated cast to one piece of cover to get the fish agitated into biting. Some of this stuff is almost impossible to get a bait through. When you get to that real heavy cover where it gets impossible to fish a spinnerbait or a crankbait around, that's when I like to pick up the flipping stick. It's a 7.5 foot rod that'll let you put the bait right into the cover. You can just ease it in there, right the thickest parts, let it fall straight down to where you think the fish are laying. But you always have more than one approach. What I'm doing here in order to efficiently work this here bank, as you can see, you've got your heavy parts of the cover, you've got your scattered light parts. Well, in the spring of the year, a lot of these fish will scatter up and down this cover, but they'll also, your bigger fish are going to get into those real heavy places. I'm going to lay my flipping stick down. I'm going to go back to the spinnerbait, and I'll work these here spinnerbait trees, and I can work through them fairly fast, just bringing it up to them, letting it flutter down, hopefully catch some of these isolated fish, and also keep my trolling motor on a fairly high speed, working up to the key places, what I feel will be the place where the fish are really going to be laying. When I get there, I'll try a little bit around the edges with the spinnerbait, but then I'll go back to the flipping stick, and early in the year like this, more than likely I'll have a jig and a frog tied on it and drop it right in where they're living. Oh, there was a good place for one. You can see how important casting accuracy can be. If you can lay it right in there where you want to, real soft and underhanded, your odds are a lot better of getting that fish to hit. Boy, he should have been there. A lot of times they're so close to the bank, you can just kind of throw it up on the bank and drag it off real quiet right into the water. And it won't go 2 feet and they'll have it. Well, this is a good looking little log jam here. Spinnerbait's pretty weedless. You can pull it over a lot of those branches and let it flutter down. A key with any bait is the closer you can keep it to the cover, the better your chances are of bringing that fish out and enticing the strike. Now I can't get him to come out, but I bet if I put a jig right in the middle there, I can get him to bite it with the flipping stick. The nice part about that flipping stick, it's long enough, being 7.5 foot long, and when you put a bait into those nasty places, your odds are pretty good of being able to get the leverage to get the fish back out. Just put it in there, shake it around. Cold water bass especially, don't strike a bait real hard. There's a lot of times it's just a little pressure. The strike can be kind of hard to detect. You've really got to concentrate and watch that line. Later on during the summertime, this heavy cover, you'll still have fish get in underneath it and lay around, but your strikes will be more aggressive. You'll really feel the fish hit the bait a lot harder. Their metabolism's a lot greater. They're feeding. Okay. Don't be afraid to work the cover real thoroughly. In other words, just don't put a bait there and skip 10 foot. Once in a while, those fish are so laid back because of those cold fronts, you've got to put it right in front of their nose. And it's a matter of dropping it in there every foot until you get it right in front of his nose. Oh man, that's a good looking spot. That old gnarled up tree there, it just don't get any better than that. That's the heaviest piece of cover along this whole bank. You know, you can have so much cover, you can look up and down these banks and you can say, well, where do I even start? Where should I start fishing this visible wood cover? Try to find something different. If it's a lay down, if you got standing timber all over this flat point, don't even worry about it. If there's one laying down tree, that's something different. That's where that fish is going to be. Wherever you got the heavy, different cover. Here, the different cover is you've got a tree that's uprooted rather than standing up. More than likely, that's a good area. There's a lot of shade. A fish can get in underneath there. The sun angle, something else you want to keep in mind when you're working your cover. Early in the year, once in a while, fish will get on the sunny side of an object and just suspend right underneath the surface, absorbing some of that warmth from the sun. But as the year progresses, your percentages are always when fishing the shady side of an object. Whether it's a log, a tree, a moss line, a reed line, there's, visible cover goes on and on. There's tons and tons of different types of visible cover. But take the wind. A lot of times just the wind blowing in on the cover can help make the fish a little more aggressive. It's blowing bait fish in there. It helps excite those fish. Weather's very, very important. Boy, oh boy. There's one. Good fish. Whoa, come here, boy. Come here. Boy, there's a pretty fish. He was right in underneath that root system. Had him hooked right in that upper lip. That is a pretty fish. You can see how fat they are this time of the year. That fish has got eggs in it. Another couple of weeks it'll be moving in on some of these shallower places to spawn. Probably hunting for a rock bank. Right now it's just come up out of this creek channel and is getting in some of that heavier cover. Boy, it was laying tight. Pretty fish. They're still so cold in this cold water that they just don't fight as aggressive as they do in the summertime. Boy, in the summertime, they'll just tear you up. They're a little sluggish yet. That's the way your bites are going to be. Your bites are going to be a little sluggish, just a little bit of pressure there. Okay, there's another good place there where you got a combination of visible cover. You've got the big tree, but you've got a tree top that's broke down right beside it. That's a lot better than that bush by itself or the tree by itself. Anytime you've got two pieces of cover together, whether it's rocks and wood, moss and wood, rocks and wood, just, you know, two different types of trees, a cedar tree and an oak tree together, anything like that is better than just a piece of cover by itself. Just ease that jig right in there. Super springtime technique. Flipping's a good technique year round, but it seems like in the springtime when those fish are in that heavy cover and really laid back, you can really hammer some good ones. Just let that line slide through your hands. Real soft entry. You don't want to spook them. They're in the shallow water, and boy, they can be jumpy. Pre-spawn fish can get jittery. That was a good fish. We got another one of them good tops coming up. See this here root system up ahead? It's identical to where I took that big bass out of a little while ago. A lot of times you can get a pattern going. If you pay attention to what the fish come out of that you caught, you can get the pattern working. You can duplicate it. Whether it was a lay down log, you go hunt for another lay down log. If you catch another fish off it, it ought to tell you in a hurry you need to be fishing lay down logs. And just skip everything in between, and pretty soon, you know, finding fish gets real easy. There's days it gets very frustrating, but you know, a lot of people think and make fishing harder than what it really is. It's a simple game if you just do a little bit of thinking and pay attention to the conditions surrounding your catches. Okay, I'm going to start out pitching. I'm going to stay a little further away from this in case I was spooking that fish. Start on the edges. Once in a while there'll be two fish on a piece of cover, and if you start at the edge closest to you, you can catch both of them. Just lob it underhanded, ease it in there real soft. Man. Right there. There he is. There, get out of there. That's a good fish. Good fish. Come here. Come here. Come here. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Come here. Oh man, would I like to have him in a tournament. Boy, the hook was barely in him. Get a belly on him too. You can see that there fish has got how his tail's starting to get red. He's already started fanning the nest. It's getting that close to spawning season. Boy, oh boy, go back there. One thing about these fish, you know, we always promote catch and release. And a lot of people, you know, are all excited about catch and release nowadays. It don't do a bit of good if you handle your fish wrong. If you want to release those fish, and especially at spawning season, release them so that they can spawn and you can catch them over and over again. Grab them by that bottom lip. Don't net them, don't drop them down on the carpet. Just pull them in, unhook them, and drop them back in, and you'll be able to catch that fish again sometime. That there fish was the same exact pattern as the last one we caught. About the same size fish off the same type of cover. We probably have got the beginning of a pretty strong pattern. I'm not saying that we can't catch another fish in here off of some different piece of structure, but I'll bet if we find another root like that, we're going to catch another big fish. They'll get back in these creeks, they'll use the same identical cover. It just gets very easy to start putting a pattern together this time of the year. Once in a while, you can take two fish out of that same piece of cover. But the way that big-headed creature tore that up, I really doubted if we'll get another bite in there. Man, that was a good fish. Okay, we're getting back down that thin stuff again. You know, so many people, they'll catch a fish on one bait, and boy, they're locked into that one style or technique. You've got to use the lure and the technique to match the cover you're fishing. Visible cover, it's very easy. It's very easy to read. You can tell what you can work through there. The time of the year and the water temperature is going to tell you which lures and which techniques are going to be productive. There's a nice little side pocket right there. You know, we not only read the cover we can see, I pay attention to my locator, what the depth is. You know, that stump might not be any good if it's laying in 5 foot of water, but if it's laying in 2 or 3 foot of water, that's, you know, that might be the key. You need to pay attention to the depth you're in when you catch a fish. There's a lot of those little bitty keys. A topo map. Well, this time of the year I'll take a topo map and I'll highlight certain depths so that I can see where your deep cuts run into your flats, into those spawning flats. And those are the areas those big fish will be laying next to. A little code I kind of go by is shallow to deep in 20 feet. I like to fish shallow cover in the spring and in the fall, but I like to fish it next to deep water. Them big fish don't like to get way off in a shallow flat very often. If a lake's stable, they'll do it, or if a lake's rising. If you got dropping water, fish the visible cover close to the drop-off. Your fish are going to pull back. We ought to spinnerbait one right there. Like a little fish turned on it. There he is. Come here, fish. Come here, boy. Boy, he's fighting. Good fish. Come here, boy. Come here. Atta boy. Good little old spinnerbait fish. Another good fat. That's a good female fish right there. Just moving in early. There you go. You know, that's 3 fish we caught out of about a 100-yard stretch of this little backwater area on the spinnerbait and the jig. We could keep going on up here and probably just keep duplicating the 2 basic techniques we're doing on some of these isolated pieces of visible cover and catch fish all day long. The weather's stable, the patterns will probably hold. We could probably do this day after day for a couple of weeks. But that's not the purpose of this show. As I said in the introduction, we're going to show you lots of different techniques and lots of different circumstances with the cover. So we're going to work on back out of here. We're going to work to some rocky banks, try to show you and illustrate some more ways that you can catch fish, possibly at other times of the year. This is primarily a springtime area. This area here will be good again in the fall. And it'll be good with these same techniques we just showed you. But once fired up and move on out of here and find something else we can show you. Boy, I hate to leave good fish like this. If this was a tournament, you couldn't pry me out of here. The hazards of filming. Okay, here we've pulled up to a change in the bank. We've got the mud back into this creek, changing into a kind of a little secondary rock bluff. You've got some broken rock going down it. It's a good place for the crawdads to gather. The bass will move in early in the year to feed on those crawdads. And one of the good techniques of catching them off this type of structure is with a crankbait. A crawdad colored crankbait. Try to duplicate what they're feeding on, not only with your colors but with the size of the bait. And that's about the size of the crawdads that they're feeding on this time of the year. And I keep the boat in fairly close, make my cast close to the bank. These fish are in shallow. They're not way down deep at the base of these rocks. And just work it real slow. In the springtime, you've got to work those baits slow. A lot of fish will follow a bait. You just want to follow that crankbait in, stop it. When you stop it, it starts to back up. If they're following it, boy, that forces them to bite it. You see this rod I'm using? How flexible that tip is? It's my crankbait rod. I don't use the same rod for everything. This is real flexible. There's a reason for that. The hooks on a crankbait aren't near as strong as what they are on a flipping jig. On that flipping jig, boy, with that 25, 30-pound test, I can put some pressure on those fish and get them out of that heavy cover. But with a crankbait, I don't want to tear those hooks out of the fish or straighten them. So I'm making up for it in my rod. I've got that real loose tip to where that fish can fight and shake his head, and he's not going to tear those hooks out. This rod's also 7 foot long, so that if I want to get that bait real deep, I can just shove it down into the water and crank it. It's going to force that bait down a lot further. But rocks. Pay attention to rocks. Anytime you've got rocks heat up a little bit more. You get the sun beating on it. Later in the afternoon when this sun swings over a little bit, this here particular spot is going to heat up. The water temperature is going to warm up a little more. These fish will probably become a little more active. Water temperature is real important in the springtime of the year, and it's real important in the fall. In the springtime, your warmer sheltered areas is where the bass are going to move in. That's the first places they're going to move in to spawn. They're going to be more active. The difference between 50-degree water and 55-degree water can be the difference between loading the boat and not getting a bite. Crankbaits really start getting good when the water temperature gets around 50 degrees if you're working them slow. If you're working them fast, you won't get a bite on them until it gets around 60. Get down the bank a little bit more. This bank, this tapers off into about a 45-degree angle is about ideal. You don't want to fish that real steep stuff early in the year. A little bit flatter, but always, I've got my locator on here, just trying to stay on the edge of this break. A lot of variables in bass fishing. It's just like one giant puzzle. The more of the pieces you can put together, the better your odds of catching the bass consistently. And run that crankbait right through some of those places. If you get hung up with a bait, with any type of steady retrieve bait, if you just slack up on it, it'll float back away from it. You can bring it, just kind of walk it right through that heavy brush. You can throw them crankbaits into some places never ever imaginable. Around them rocks, through them brush piles, always trying to get into where those fish are at. You'll have a whole school of fish move into a rocky bank and just kind of scatter up and down it. Good springtime technique. Get down there baiting. Okay, right up here you got your change again. You've got your rock turning back into your flat, into your mud bottom, and right where it changes is another good place for a fish to be. Boy, right down that lane there. Come on, dog, get down there and hunt. There he is. Stay down, boy. Stay down. Where are you going? Boy, that's good. Easy does it. Come here. Oh, man. That's another good fish. Boy, he's going where he wants to, too. Come here. Well, that crankbait's barely in him. He just nipped at the back end of it. Come here, big fella. Come here. Well, that's a light line. Come here. Watch those hooks. Whew. Just one little hook right in the back end of him. Oh, man, he's cold. He just ate that. Look at how fat with eggs that fish is. Just ate that crawdad-colored crankbait right up. Laying right at that change in the bank. Nice fish. Well, them big old sows are starting to move up. You can tell it's spring. Dogwoods will be blooming. It'll be going crazy before long. Get back in there and get another one. Close to the bank with those casts. Another good example of a good flipping area is this floating mass of stuff on top of the surface. It's called flotsam, sawdust. There's a lot of different names for it, but it's a matted surface cover. And they like to get in underneath in those dark areas. It can be, you know, floating vegetation that's piled up in a certain place, hyacinths, depending on your part of the country, any what I call topwater cover, a blanket area that a fish can get in underneath is real good. And they're good flipping places. You need to drop those baits down through there. You might start out running a spinner bait by the edge of it, or maybe a buzz bait or a topwater bait if the water's warm enough. But don't be afraid to get a bait to break right down through those matted areas. They're terrific places for catching big fish. Another good type of cover to work with the crankbait, no matter what time of the year you're fishing, is riprap. Riprap, you have a lot of it around bridge abutments, on the faces of dams, just any area where they're trying to protect from waves and wave action, wash, keep it from eroding. They'll pile riprap. And the fish gather in around there. They chase bait fish, they chase crawdads. The crawdad crankbait early in the year, like what we're fishing right now, can be real productive on riprap. When you're working the riprap, you keep your boat halfway close to it and parallel it. That way the whole cast you make, your bait's going to be in the strike zone. You might make one cast and keep it 2 or 3 foot out from the bank. Just stop and go retrieve. Your next cast might be a little bit deeper. You want to determine what depth they're at on this. That riprap's coming down, and where it changes from rock to the mud bottom is probably about right out there, judging by the slope of the bank. And right there on that change, they'll lay along the riprap banks too. Speed on the crankbait retrieves is very, very important. Just don't throw it out there and reel it in, throw it out there and reel it in all day long. That stop and go is a great, great technique. Come here, fish. Bite that bait. In the summertime, I'd probably be throwing a shad color along here because these fish would be feeding more on shad, minnows, bluegill, and I'd want to try to imitate what they're feeding on. Summertime, the warmer that water gets, the steeper banks you want to fish. Get out in them creek channels, them bluff banks. A lot of them lakes out west, they fish nothing but bluffs, and all they fish is the little shady spots along it. The sun beating down on this riprap ought to be bringing these fish in and making them active. Super crawdad bank. This is a man-made piece of visible structure here. Now, if we're going, there's a little stick right in the water there. If that was out 2 or 3 more feet, it'd be an ideal fish holding place because there'd be a combination of the cover again. Anytime you can find a combination of cover, it's fantastic. A stump along here with a combination of rock would be good. Laying down logs are one of my favorites. We're going to try to find you some laying down logs before the day's over and show you exactly how we fish them. Riprap's an easy technique to work. If you want to get your child or your wife involved in fishing, this is a good technique. You don't have all the overhanging tree limbs around for them to get hung up in. And they can throw it out there and just reel it in real steady. And a lot of these fish will hook themselves. A hook set with a crankbait isn't like a flipping stick. You just start reeling and put a little pressure just like that, and he'll hook himself. There, see how my hook's got hung up right on the tip there? When that happens, and it'll happen a lot when you crankbait, just give it one of those numbers. Just a chop on the rod with your hand, and it'll pop free every time. Come on, there's one. That's a good fish. Come here, boy. Come here. Boy, he's a pulling. Don't let any slack get in your line. That's another good fish. He ate that. Oh, man. Springtime sow. Don't horse him. Boy, look at, he made another run. Come here, big boy. Come here. He'll give up pretty soon. He just got the back of that bait again. Okay. Oh, man. Oh, careful. Watch them hooks. Got him. Whew. Man. You talk about a fighter. He was a fighter. Another old pre-spawned fish. Going to be 10 pounds next time. Ate that crawdad colored crankbait. That's 2 of them we caught, and on 2 different types of rock cover. That crankbait is really good around rocks this time of the year. Just imitating that crawdad feed. The watercolor here is just a little bit clearer than what we were flipping those fish out of back there, but it's still there was a bass chasing a shad right there, which is kind of unusual this time of the year. But it's still a little bit dirty. The fish in this color water are definitely going to be shallower than they would in clear water. So watercolor itself a lot of times will tell you not only how close you can work your bait and keep your boat to the fish, but also what type of technique you need to use. I wouldn't try to come up and flip a fish in gin clear water. I'd stay back and maybe make a pitch to him, or stay way back and throw a crankbait to him like that right down the bank. We've come right around the corner from the riprap we were crankbaiting, and here's those bridge pilings we mentioned earlier. This can be another real good place, and here I've got a different rod and reel that I'm going to use. It's just, it's a spinning outfit where I can handle lighter line, and I've got a Gitsit or a little tube worm on the end, and I'm just making casts right next to these pilings and letting it free fall right down beside it. A lot of fish will suspend around pilings and bridge abutments, and it can be a place that people overlook. It can be one of them subtle types of cover. Places aren't only good for bass, they're good for a crappie. You'll catch a lot of Kentucky bass too around these places. That little light line and the tube jig, you don't have to worry about him getting hung up in anything. This is open water, and they're just suspended in the shade next to that concrete. With the wind blowing in from the other direction, it's probably moving a few bait fish by. But just let those baits free fall down, and if that bait stops and your line stops sinking, more than likely it's a fish. It's a little earlier in the year for this technique to be real good, but it's a super middle of the summer. When it's real hot, that's when this technique is really good. The Gitsit isn't really the only bait that's real effective on pilings and this type of cover. There's a couple other little things that can work real good and are real easy to fish. One's the jigging spoon. Just a piece of lead with a hook on behind it, and you get right over the top, right next to that cover, and just let it free fall down and jig it. A lot of times on your locator, you can see the depth that the fish are at on them pilings, and you can let it down that depth and just sit there and jig it in front of them, and it can be very effective. Another bait is the little George, and you're just letting it go down and you're fluttering it, you're kind of yo-yoing it, and every time you pull up, that little spinner will sit there and gyrate, and it at times can trigger a lot of fishing around this type of cover. There's a lot of different cover in this area. That point over there with the natural rocks, a place fish will get. The riprap points, there's an island right there that it's an old road that come out and made a high spot and drops right off into the creek channel. That would be a super summertime spot where you'd be throwing a worm up there and dragging it off down into the ditch there. We get up around the corner here, you'll be able to see where the road came in and made a crossing. Once in a while, just by paying attention to the shoreline, you can figure out what is out a little further and why some of that stuff is there. If you use your head a little bit, it gets real easy. You can see that road coming in off the bank. You see it coming in over there. You know it's got to cross that creek somewhere out there. And right where that intersection is that's another good place to fish. That's not really visible cover, but it was a visible piece of cover that triggered you out there to that invisible piece. A lot of times, just by looking out over a lake, you can read where your creek channels are. You see these big heavy trees here? That's a good indication that's where the creek channel is winding around. They've been growing there for a longer period of time. Even your type of tree. Cedar trees grow in your high spots on your ridges. You can look out across the lake, and if you see a cluster of cedar trees in an area, there's a good chance that might be a high spot or a real rocky spot, the type of terrain they grow in. Cypress trees, some of your bigger hardwoods, grow along your creek channel. So actually, by reading the types of trees, a lot of times you can tell what your terrain is in underneath. Willow trees, another good example. They grow around old ponds, along the dams, old ponds. If you see a circle of dead willow trees out in the lake, there's a good indication that that's a flooded over farm pond, and it can be another good fishing place. So learn to read the different types of trees and where they should be growing. And a good way of doing that is when you're driving down the highway, just looking out across the land that is not flooded. That'll show you where the different types of trees grow, and just visualize that area if it was flooded, and it'll help diagnosing the cover on the lake a lot easier. Here's another good example of a prime piece of visible cover. The old laying down log coming in on a rocky bank. Another example of a combination of cover. I'm going to try flipping a fish out of here. That sun beating down, the water's warming up. This water's still what I'd call stained, and it's got a lot of particles in it, and it warms up a little faster with the sun beating down, and something you might pay attention to early in the spring. These are the type of areas that will warm up maybe 10, 12 degrees during the, a 3 or 4 hour span during the day. And There might have not been fish here early in the morning, but as the day comes on, these places can get real good. Fish will come up out of the creek channel and lay right in that cover. Soak up some of that warm water. I always like to make a pitch to one side and just work it down along the edge of that laying down cover or that horizontal cover, all the way to the base of it. Some days they'll be right next to the bank on it. Other days they'll be laying out here in 6-7 foot of water, right at the root system. And then make your next pass on the other side of it. Work it down, cover both sides. You can do this with several different baits. I'm using the flipping technique or the pitching technique and a jig right now because the water is still fairly cold. Okay, right down the middle between the two of them. There he is. It's a good fish. Come here, boy. Come out of there. Man, you talk about a hog. Get away from that trolling motor. Man, oh man, a hog off a log. Come here, boy. Come to me. All right. Look at the size of him. Man. Oh, just laying up there right between them. That was the third flip I made to that spot before I finally got that fish to bite. Good fish. That fish goes 6.5 pounds. I'll put him right back in that log. Whew. Man, he ate that jig. I'm flipping into those places. 3/8 ounce jig with a #1 pork frog. Black and blue. That's one color that it's just a personal. Boy, I'm excited. It's a personal confidence color of mine. Another color I like in this stained water is black and chartreuse. But the dark colors is primarily what I go with. I'm trying to imitate a crawdad. And that's what a jigging frog does. And man, did he eat that thing up. Just kerthump. It was a real hard hit. He got down in between there, but we did get him out. Laying logs on rocky banks in the spring can be one of the things you really key on for visible cover. Now down the bank we got 2 or 3 more laying logs, and there might be a fish on each one of them, just like back in the creek on them root systems. This could be a pattern we got going. It's the time of the day with that water warming up that they'll move up on this type of stuff. Them rocks, especially the lighter colored rocks like along here, will a lot of times really heat that water up in a hurry. Whew. We are having fun now. This is one of them pea gravel spawning banks. Just you got the fine broken rock here. This is another area that fish will move in early in the year, and it's actually a spawning area. Good place to catch them. Good crankbait area. This is the type of place that you wouldn't fish during the summertime. It's a good place early in the year. It's got that rock again. It's got some double things that make it good. You've got a laying log coming in there. Good place to throw the spinnerbait around. Once again, always throw by that cover, bring it up to it, and let it flutter down. Good looking piece of cover. Right there is where it should have happened. And if he's there, he don't want to eat. You could sit around and take a piece of cover like this and you could throw a worm around it if it was warmer. Flip a jig around it in the cold water. If this is a tournament and I come across a real good piece of cover, I'd probably try 3 or 4 different techniques before I'd leave it, because this stuff is real isolated. It's really the only cover on this bank that's different. And something different is always a key. Some good branches coming off going down in the water there in about 4 or 5 foot of water. You know there's a fish. You just know there's a fish in a place like this. I'd spend a little extra time here. Force feed them. Make them come out and bite. Come on, eat that bait. There he is. Come on, there, get over there, fish. Good fish. Oh, he did a little one, shoot. I thought he was another good one. He was behind that log. Come to me. Ah, yeah, you're not that big. Lift your right in here. Hit that old spinnerbait hard. Yes, sirree. Back in that tree where you belong. Just to let it flutter down over the branch. He just hammered it. He hit awful hard for an early spring bass. But he was right where he should have been. A piece of cover like that is so obvious. That isolated stuff. You just know, a lot of times they'll bunch up there. If this was a little later, a post-spawn type of fish, all these fish that had spawned up and down this pea gravel bank would probably come back and concentrate on the only piece of cover here. Well, we're by that. Back to the old crankbait and try to get an isolated fish or two. Right up here on the bank, there's an old road coming in, this little old trail coming down off of there. Might still have a little bit of ditch cover or a little change in depth on its sides. That's a good place for a migration route where you see these roads coming in. A lot of times the fish will follow the roads, ditches, fence lines, creek channels, a lot of different types of cover that'll just kind of funnel them up onto some of these good gravel banks and feeding and spawning areas. The secondary cover, the cover you don't see, is really important. This is almost like going down fishing them rip-rap banks, but instead of fishing at real parallel, I'm almost fishing at a 45-degree angle to the bank. That way I'm covering my different depths, and a lot of times a little bit of different rock. You'll have the combination of rock. Up here a little further, we're starting to leave the pea gravel, and we're going into what I call salt and pepper banks, where you've got the pea gravel mixed with chunk rock. That can also be good. Pay attention to the soil makeup, the rock makeup when you do catch a fish, and you can go duplicate it in another place. This bank is also catching sun exposure, which this time of the year is important. Later in the warmer months, then I want those shady banks. Water. There's a fish. Oh, he come off. Shoot, he had it good. I might have put a little too much pressure on him. Boy, them crankbait fish, when they're just nipping at that bait, it's easy to tear the hooks out of them. Well, shoot, you can't land them all. Yeah, we got some good chunk rock coming up ahead up there on that little point. You can see how this bank swings out right there and it breaks into some bigger rock. Right there on that rock change, it's just like a soil bottom change. Like if you were going from a mud bottom to a clay bottom, it'd be another change that could hold a bunch of fish. Right here you got the rock change, the pea gravel to the chunk rock. Chunk rock is excellent crankbait and jig fishing early in the year like this. Something we're going to try when we get up there is also throwing a lizard around it. A plastic lizard on pre-spawn and spawning fish is a very effective technique. This looks like crawdad heaven right here. All that chunk rock, change from that pea gravel. You can see the slope of the bank even change. It's a little bit steeper there. Got a couple of ledges up there on the bank. A lot of times what you got on the bank you also have underneath. This might be a real good place to work a lizard down. A lizard can be a real good bait early in the year. You take a big old bulky lizard like that, them spawning and pre-spawn fish just love it. Use a halfway light slip sinker and just throw it up in those areas. Just work it down through them rocks and off them little ledges. Boy, they hate that bait. When they hit it, they're out to kill it. If I'd come to an area like this and catch a couple fish on a crankbait, before I'd leave it, I'd try the lizard or jig and frog. Just because they stopped hitting on one bait, don't run off and leave an area. Try 2 or 3 different techniques on it. A lot of times all they want's a different look. Just let her hit bottom. I'm using a 6-foot rod here that's fairly stiff. It's graphite, it's got real good feel. I can just feel it crawling over them rocks. I can feel them little drop-offs. Yet it's got enough backbone that if I need to set the hook, I can drive that bait right in there. Fairly light wire hook when I'm casting like this. It's harder to get a hook penetration when you're making long casts. Always move it with the rod tip and reel in your slack. You fish a lizard just like you would a plastic worm, and almost like you would when you're casting a jig and a frog. Good, good bait. Right up here, the bank changes again. Right where it changes, right where those two types of cover meet. Man, I just can't tell you how important that is and how fish will just stop. Fish that are cruising down a bank, when they get to a change like that, they'll just stop and congregate at times. And you, oh boy, you can just really hammer them. Never fish a place without a reason. Always be thinking, why am I going to fish this? What should work here? What techniques would be best for this water temperature, this time of the year? Certain things that work in the summertime definitely will not work at this water temperature we're in now. Things that work today will not work 2 days from now if we have a cold front go through. I couldn't catch fish off a bank like this if a cold front went through. I'd have to go back to some of them laying down logs and heavy old gnarled stumps like what we fished earlier the day with a flipping stick in order to catch fish. Time of the year, water color, water conditions, boy, there's tons of variables in this ball game. And at times we never get all the answers right, and those are the days we don't catch much. And then there's days like this where there he is. Oh, that's a good fish. All right. Boy, he hammered that lizard. I was just kind of swimming along there. All right, come here, little fella. Whew. Boy, did he hit it. I almost missed him. Hook got him right there in the side. Nice fat little keeper. He just balled that lizard up, laying right on one of them ledges. I felt that bait come down off that ledge and he just popped it. Always have that bait hanging perfectly straight. Let's see if we can't get another one off of there. Man, oh man, did he hit that. That's a little male fish up there. A lot of times you'll catch them males out of an area long before them females move up. He hit it on the drop. Most of your strikes will come when you pull it over something and that bait's dropping. Okay, that's right. He hit it right where the rock change was. Right where the pea gravel turned into chunk rock. Later on, these fish are spawning this gravel. They'll move back to chunk rock. Water warms up a little bit more. They'll move from the chunk rock to some bluffs. We're going to go down the lake and try to get you into a little clearer water and find some bluffs and some boat docks and try to show you a few techniques that we use on some clear water visible structure. Different ways of catching them off of it. We've had a good day in some of this stained water, but lakes vary from parts of the country. Some parts of the country you don't run into a whole lot of dirty water. Your lakes stay real clear, and some of the techniques that, that felt like one. Some of the techniques we've used here just won't work as effectively, and you need to back off a little bit. Maybe use lighter line and smaller baits, but no matter whether we're talking 2 different types of rock cover or 2 different types of weeds, just remember combinations of different types of cover are always better than one type of cover by itself. Well, let's go see if we can't find one doing something else. Everything we try has been working pretty good. Right here, we're kind of just going down a bluff bank fishing it. This is real steep cover. This is the type of stuff I hunt for in the warm, warm weather. The fish will stack up in this deep water off these bluff walls. It's a good wintertime spot too. You got your deeper water. You hunt for the breaks along here just like you do on some of your other places. The little points on the bluffs, the little rock slides are real good. Technique I'm using right now is real effective in the fall of the year along these steep banks. and I call it bulging a spinnerbait. Just right underneath the surface, big blade on it, big Colorado blade that makes a lot of disturbance, and just waking it, keeping it right underneath the surface. It'll bring those fish up that are suspended along these bluffs. Boy, you can get some vicious strikes. Great technique for Kentucky bass. If you have a lot of Kentuckys in your lake and you've got some steep cover, some bluff banks, don't be afraid to bulge that spinnerbait in the fall of the year. In the summertime, just free floating a worm down along here. A gits, it's also a good bait. If the water's real clear, like it is out in some of the western lakes, that gits it can be super. The little shaded areas, boy, this big bulging spinnerbait sure works good on this stuff. You wouldn't think so. A lot of times the water will be 40 to 60 foot deep along these bluffs, and you'd think, boy, there's no way they'll come up and hit something right underneath the surface. But they sure will. The pressure waves that bait puts out are great. Okay, here we got a little rock slide. I might be able to catch one on a lizard or a worm where this bluff is broken down a little bit here. This isn't a real good spot for this time of the year, but later on it sure, oh, there was something tapped it. Later on it could get good. Give him another try. Little change like that is real good. Okay, now it's going to steepen back up. Go back to bulging this spinnerbait. And I try to keep my boat in real close when I'm working these bluffs. And I want to run that bait just a foot or two off the bank. The clearer the water, the longer the cast. Just right underneath the surface. In the wintertime, when you get on these bluff banks, you can take this spinnerbait and let it flutter all the way to the bottom. And it'll be halfway effective then. But the fall of the year, fish have a tendency to suspend. And they'll suspend a lot along these walls. The wind blowing in on these walls can make them doubly effective. Make the fish a lot more active. I don't know whether they're going to hit it this early in the year or not, but boy, later on it'd be good. But always the single spin. It puts out the pressure waves you need to bring up these suspended fish. Once in a while a Zara spook or that type of topwater lure will work in the fall on the ends of these bluffs. But I can cover a lot of water with this technique. Fairly steady retrieve when you're doing this. Come out of there, fish. Well, that kind of gives you an idea, if you've got some of this steeper stuff on your lake that you're fishing a lot, on what to do. It's just another technique, another pattern that you can establish. And it's good in the fall, it's good in the winter time. And like I say, in the winter time, you're going to have to drop down along these bluffs for the fish. In the fall, they'll be suspended. In the summertime, they'll be a little deeper, and they'll be kind of on the ends of them. Where these bluffs turn into points, you can usually find those fish and catch them on a gitsit or on a plastic worm, getting down and working the bottom. But don't forget about that big bulging spinnerbait in the fall. Super technique for not only largemouth, but also Kentucky bass along the bluffs. I call it burning the bluffs because I'm reeling it fast and keeping it right underneath the surface. Here's a situation you run into a lot all over the country, and that's boat docks. Boat dock fishing can be fantastic, but it can also be a little frustrating. Right now I'm just working a spinnerbait right underneath the foam, trying to catch some suspended fish. Some docks will have brush piles underneath them, and a lot of times you can key on where the brush pile's at. If the people have rod holders there, lawn chairs, crappie lights pointed down in the water, that's usually the part of the dock where the brush pile is located. There might be a big old mean bass in it. A lot of these free floating docks that have the styrofoam underneath them, the fish will suspend. And they'll lay right on the ends or where ladder comes into the water, and just working that spinnerbait along underneath the surface works pretty good. You can get them to run out there and just clobber that bait. An isolated dock, just like an isolated log, can be real good. So many people come by these boat docks. Oh, there was a little one come up and grabbed it from behind. Might have been a crappie. So many people that are working these boat docks just work the front edge of them and go on to the next one without ever coming to the back end. What I like to do when you get to the back side of these docks is pick my flipping stick back up, get over these cables and back to, you know, try to outsmart the people a little bit. Fish areas that they don't fish so much. Get over these cables, supports that are supporting your ramps. A lot of fish will spawn around these ramp supports. Well, that'd have been a nice place for one. And let's try the next dock. A little top in the water. This is the right type of bank for this time of the year. It's one of them flatter banks that the fish are going to be moving in on. In the summertime, I'd be fishing docks on a steeper bank, not necessarily a bluff bank, but one that had probably at least 10 foot of water underneath the ends of the docks. These docks here are in from 2 to 6 foot of water. There's another broken down old ramp. The worse shape the dock's in, usually the better it is. The docks that got a lot of LJ buildup underneath the foam attract bait fish. Those bait fish attract the game fish. In the fall, out on these ends of the docks, you'll have your swarms of bait fish moving through the coves. Those fish will be suspended there, and you can just take a jig and a frog and just swim it along, just right underneath the surface. Boy, they'll come running out from underneath there and hit it just like they do the spinnerbait. Just actually swimming it right underneath the water. For some reason, that jig works real good, swimming along the sides of styrofoam. You really watch your line here, because they'll come running out there and grab it and take off. And because you're swimming it, you won't really feel the strike. You'll see the movement of the line. Nice little shaded spot right there. There he is. Oh man, what a fish. What a fish. Come here, boy. Man. He come right off the corner there. Come here, big boy. Oh man, you a mean one. He come out from underneath that styrofoam and just ate it. He was just there suspended. Fat, fat fish. He hadn't even, oh, look at the eggs in that, but he hadn't even begun to fan. He's just come in out of deep water. Good, good fish. He's right where he was supposed to be, laying right in the corner there, right in the shade. Come out and hit that jig, just swimming it by underneath. This here dock's close to the being like the one we caught that big fish off of. Wind's hitting it a little bit different. There could still be one here somewhere. He's probably right in that shady corner, just like where that other fish was. Try to cover as much of the dock as you can. There's days you can just pull up and you know exactly where they're going to be, and there's other days they're liable to come off any part of it. Pow, right there's where he ought to be. But he isn't. Oh shoot, he come out and grabbed that bait and missed it. Maybe I can get him to hit the jig. Oh, there he is. Come out of there, fish. All right. Oh, he just a little one. Come here, boy. Oh yeah. Come out from underneath there and smack that spinnerbait and couldn't even get it in your mouth. Well, he ate that jig. A lot of times, If you miss a fish on a certain bait, rather than throwing that same bait back in there, give them a different look. Buzzbait fish, throw a worm back in on them if they blow up and miss it. Spinnerbait fish like that early in the year, boy, throw a jig in on them and they'll eat it just about every time. Little slower moving bait. I mean, he didn't even hesitate. He just ran right out there and gobbled it. This next dock is a little bigger dock. It offers a little more shade and cover for the fish. This would be a better summertime dock. You can see the seats up there and the rod holders. There's probably a big old brush pile here. It's in a little deeper water. Middle of the summertime, they could bunch up here. It's the type of place. Night fishing's real good around boat docks too. A lot of times there's a lot of activity. And during the daytime, the fish are a little spooked. But you come back at night when things settle down and you can catch them real good. Boat docks offer a lot of different things. Shade, draw in them bait fish. You got to have two things to really hold bass, and that's the cover and the forage. And boat docks offer both. We're just about out of water here. Let's run to the back of the cove and see if we can't catch one on a different technique. This here point's a good example of a chunk rock type of point that's good early in the year. And the water's just a little clearer here, and I want to show you a technique that works real good, not only in this type of situation, but also around boat docks and around the edge of grass lines. I call it jerking a rogue or a minnow type of bait. You're just throwing it out there, reeling it down, and just working your rod tip in short snaps. I like a 5.5 or 6 foot rod, medium action. I'm reeling it down there and just snapping this rod. Just keeping that bait moving underneath the water, just like this. Down there and even bumping into some of them rocks, almost like the crankbait. Working it out in a little deeper water, stop it, moving it again, just in short. Bait's just going like that through the water, and any fish that are following it really have a hard time keeping from just taking that bait. You're almost forcing them to eat it when it backs up on them like that. Just kind of suspends. This technique, the clearer the water, the better it is. Right now I've got kind of a gold with an orange belly bait on, which in slightly stained water will produce. But it's a good cold water method, a good cold water technique. And you can use this same technique on several different types of visible cover. This is just like the spinner bait. When you're jerking one of these baits, you've got to figure out how fast the fish want it. There's days they want it real slow, just barely moving through the water. And there's days you can really get to popping it like this and moving it real fast, or even working it in big sweeps to try to get those reflex strikes. As far as colors, silver and black's a real good color, silver and blue's a real good color. They're good shad imitation colors. But if you get a little stained water, don't be afraid to go to your golds and your orange. Times of the year, even a bright red stick bait like what we're throwing or minnow type of bait will produce. The wind is hitting this just perfect. The windier the bank, usually the better when you're doing this technique. Points are so good that just another type of cover you can read just by looking at the shoreline. There's days the flat points will produce, there's days the steeper points. Shoreline contour will really tell you a lot about what's underneath. There's one. Come on, baby. Come on. Little old rogue fish. Don't jump too much. Boy, I hate it when they jump with these treble hooks. Come here. Easy, easy, easy. Easy, boy. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, you gotta watch those hooks. Man. I don't even like getting my hand near them when they're like that. They shake their head, they got you. Oh man, there he is. He's a little beat up already, little old male fish. He hit that bait when it was backing up. I gave it a jerk, and as soon as I stopped it, he climbed on it. liable to be more of them stacked up on this windy point. That wind will bunch fish up pretty good. Makes it a little rough for you to fish at times. The fish are more active. They not only have a crawdad bank here, they also have the wind blowing shad around the corner, so they have two different types of forage they can be feeding on this particular point. Get up back up here in the wind where I caught that fish to see if we can't catch that big old female that's around somewhere. This is where you appreciate your reels, your magnets in them, throwing against the wind. Hell, used to be you'd get a backlash. You tried to throw a bait casting reel into the wind with a light bait like what I got on. Right on the tip of that point. Should be about, there he is. Good fish. Boy, he's a fighting fish. Come here, boy, come here. Right on that wind. He's staying down. Come up. That still is not, careful. He's barely hooked. Oh man. Boy, he just barely had that hook in him. And he was about, boy, this scares me. Just get one of them hooks in you, can ruin a day's fishing. There we go. He was just a little further up the point than what that other fish was. They're just kind of laying right around where that wind's curling around, apparently bringing bait fish there. They were almost twins. Once in a while you have a group of fish and they'll all be the same size. You can just pull into a place and take a whole limit, just have a ride. He hit it the same way as I was jerking it down underneath the water, right where the wind's curling around there. About a medium type of retrieve. The colder the water, the more you slow it down. The warmer the water, the more you need to speed your baits up. Wind's picking up more and more all the time. Fish are starting to get active. The sun's been out all day warming that water. Spring of the year when that water's cold, your afternoons will really offer the better fishing than what the early morning does. About right in there. It don't look like there's going to be another one right there. It was an ideal place for a whole school of them. You catch a fish off place, don't be afraid to work it, 30, 40 yards each side of that point. The tip of the point isn't the only place they'll be. Come on, mama. There's a bump. Oh, shit. He bumped it. Might be a big old drum. Drum will get on these rocky points and some of these lakes too this time of the year. Something bumped it, and I'm sure that wasn't a rock. Usually you get off away from the bank, you got pretty free sailing. Now we'll try it out a little bit deeper. Those other fish were laying up there in about 3-4 foot of water. There he is. Feels like a pretty good fish. Oh, he's staying down. That's the old female that was up there with them male fish. She got a mouthful of what she wanted. Come here, old gal. Well, let them wear down. Don't try to land a green fish with all them hooks in your mouth. There we go. I always use the pliers, getting them hooks out, whether I'm using a crankbait or, boy, she had them everywhere. Don't handle that fish any more than you have to. There we go. There you go, Mama. Well, that was 3 off this one area. That's pretty good for a spot, but it's not real unusual this time of the year. They'll group up, the wind kind of forces them together. That was a good fish. Those type I like in a tournament for sure. They get fat this time of year, they can hardly waller their way around. Okay, you can see how the rock's starting to change here again. It's getting back into the bluff type of bank. Right here on the change is where these fish were bunched up. Not only the change in the rock, you also had the slope of the bank and the direction of the wind blowing in here. You had a combination of things working in your favor. Oh, that was fun. This right here is an isolated laying down log that just floated into a mud flat here. And during the summertime, one of the techniques I'm doing right now is just running a buzz bait through this stuff. It can be very, very good. It's an easy bait to learn how to catch fish with because you can see when the strike's going to occur. Just crawl it over them places. Early in the morning during the summertime, late in the evening, fish will come up on these flats. The old lunker lure gets about as good as it gets when it comes to buzz baiting. We've got some options we can do on this type of cover. We don't have to just stick to the one old bait and work it through. Noise is such a factor on bringing these fish up out of this cover. I've got what I call a clacker jack here. It's just almost like a regular lunker lure, but you can hear the loud noise it makes. It's got 2 blades that click together. Completely different frequency there. It's got a little blade up in front, and the 2 just kind of clang together. And boy, it'll agitate them and bring them up at times when that quieter buzz bait just won't do any good. It's just another option, another technique that you can give these fish. When I'm really into some buzz bait fishing, I'll have 3 different baits tied on, and each piece of cover I'll give them their choice. I'll give them that quiet bait usually first, and then this noisy clacker. And if they don't hit it, I've got one more little option that I will try. My third little option for some of this isolated cover on these flats is what I call a jumping jack. It's a combination of a buzz bait and a spinner bait. It's got the buzz bait blade, and it's got a little willow leaf blade behind it, just like a spinner bait. And the way I work it through this stuff is I always throw by it, buzz it up there just like a buzz bait, then let it fall. As it's falling, that little blade will turn. Just working it in series, just kind of skipping it along, then letting it settle. Just like a fleeing shad. Boy, you can bring it right next to the stump or bringing it over one of these branches and kill it. Boy, that's where your strikes will come. Just as it gives that little drop, then start it up again. It's a very versatile little bait. But this gives you 3 different options on a lay down like this. Rather than just a standard old buzz bait where you come up and threw it a couple times and went on. Some of these fish are getting smarter every year. We need to get smarter right along with them and try some different techniques to catch them. A place like this you know has got a fish. It's a little too early in the year and the water temperature is probably a little too cold. But if I come back here once that water got to be 70, 75 degrees, I just about guarantee one of these 3 baits would catch a fish. I want to talk a little bit about the different types of rods I use in my everyday fishing for fishing the visible cover and all types of cover, the different lures I'm going to use and that I use in my normal type of fishing, the different line combinations. You know, it goes on and on. There's so many variables in this fishing game that it confuses a lot of people. Bait that I use a lot's a jerk type of bait, and I'm getting it down underneath the water and working it in short little snaps. And I like a 5.5 or 6 foot rod for that, with about a medium action tip. The rods I use are made by Daiwa, and we come out with a team series of rods that have different actions for these different techniques and different baits. This here worm and jigging rod that I use to throw lizards and plastic worms, or if I'm casting a jig and a frog. It's a good rod for working these bottom bumping type of baits. It's got a good action to it. It's got good feel to it, which is very important. It's a graphite rod, and it's a fairly stiff action rod. Another rod that I use a bunch, and it's definitely one of my personal favorites because I designed this particular rod for Daiwa, and it's the flipping and pitching stick. And I use it a lot with the jig and the pork frog, especially early in the year. Later in the year, I'll go to flipping plastic worms. I even flip spinner baits once in a while with this rod. But it's a stiff 7.5 foot rod with a fairly loose tip so that I can pitch some of the baits back into the cover. The next rod that I do use a bunch is a crankbait rod. A crankbait rod's a very specialized tool. It needs a real loose tip so that you can play those fish and so that you don't tear out these little old hooks that are in these crankbaits. They got finer hooks than what a flipping bait like a big old jig does, and you need to play the fish a little bit more. The crankbait rod is also 7 foot long, so that if you need to get that bait down deep, you can stick the point of the rod down into the water and just get the needling and reeling and get it down there to depths that you never ever before imagined. The one other rod that I always have in the boat, it's what I feel tops me off as far as giving me the options, is a spinning rod. I don't throw spinning equipment that much in fishing heavy cover, but when I get to certain places where I need to throw real small baits in clear water or on a bluff bank, there's a lot of different places you do use light line, throwing gitsets and 4-inch worms, little bitty crankbaits. Whenever I have to go to the small baits and the light line, that's when I go to the spinning equipment. This particular spinning rod's 6 foot long, and it gives me the option where I can skip a bait in underneath stuff with it, but it handles the light equipment, and that's what I need, something that'll handle those light baits and the light line. Between all of these rods, I can use line from 4-pound test all the way up to 30, and I can fish a variety of visible cover. Any situation I run into, I'll be able to fish with this equipment. And I spool it up with different type of stuff. And when I'm using the flipping stick, there's 1 or 2 lines I use. I always use strand line, but I'll use class or their fluorescent type of blue line. I can see both of those lines, and that's very important. If you can't see your line, you won't be able to detect the strikes. When I get up to 30-pound line, I really like the class because it's so smooth, it comes through my fingers, and I can pitch it a little further. But both of these particular lines I can see, and you've got to be able to see your line when you're flipping in order to detect the strikes. It's the same way when you're fishing a lizard or fishing a plastic worm. You've got to really pay attention to watching that line. Now when I get in a real clear water and get down to using the gitset or even crankbait, I a lot of times go to a clear type of line. The clear strand to me works a little bit better. I've got a little more confidence in it in gin clear water. If I was going trout fishing, I'd definitely use the clear line. The other line I use, prime. When I'm fishing deep where I really have trouble feeling those fish and getting a good hook set and getting them up off the bottom, that's where I use prime. It's a specialized type of line. It's a co-filament, and because it's a co-filament, it don't stretch. It enables you to get that good hook set, and because it don't stretch, it also gives you better sensitivity and better feel of what your bait's doing, and it helps transmit that bite a lot better. So those are the options I've got on the different types of lines, the different weights. You're going to have to, vary that to your clarity of your water and the density of your cover. But the heavier your visible cover is, the heavier the line you have to use. So be open-minded in your equipment and match your equipment to the type of cover you're fishing. Something that I used to notice a lot when I was doing a lot of guiding a few years ago was people would not take the time to retie their baits, or they were tying the wrong knots. And then when they'd get that fish of a lifetime, they'd wonder why they lost it. So a couple little knots that I do use a lot and which make a difference. One with a type of bait like a crankbait or a rapala, a minnow bait that needs a lot of freedom to work in the water Rather than tie direct, I like to use a loop knot. And a nice easy loop knot is just letting it hang like that. If you run it through, turn it about 3 times, and then just take this loop and feed the bait all the way through it. And then you can sit here, and you can actually adjust this loop down for however small you want it. But you can see right there, you've got the freedom for that bait to work. Take your scissors and clip this line to where it's about 1/8 of an inch, just like that. And that's a good little easy loop knot. It's fast to tie. You can tie it with your big long baits or your little bitty baits, but tie it with the baits that need the freedom of movement in the water. It'll give them more action, and the more action you can give some of those baits, the more strikes you're going to get. Another little knot, and I don't use a lot of knots. I don't know a lot of knots, and I don't want to really take the time to learn a bunch of knots because all it does is confuse you. And you know, I'd like to tie 2 or 3 knots right than be able to tie 10 knots wrong. The knot I use the majority of the time when I'm flipping or when I'm tying on a worm hook or a spinner bait is what we call an improved clinch knot. You just run it through there and you wrap it around about 6 or 7 times. You take this here end, run it back through right by the little loop you made, and then this last loop you have, you just stick it back through there. It's kind of hard to see. You got it right at that stage. Moisten it a little bit, and then just slide it down and pull it tight. Clip it off again, and you're ready to roll. Those are 2 knots that'll get me through just about all of my fishing. We've showed you a lot of different things today, a lot of different pieces of visible cover, maybe too much, I don't know. We hope we didn't confuse you, but between mixing up your techniques and mixing up your cover, you ought to be able to catch more fish. There's a lot of things you need to keep in mind as far as the weather conditions leading up to your fishing trip, the time of year, the depth, how dense is the cover. The variables just go on and on and on, and that's the neat part about bass fishing. I guess we'll probably never ever know all the answers. We just try to figure it out the best we can, and if we use our most important tool of all, our head, it gets a little easier all the time.